I cannot express this more clearly to people. We have these fake experts who get everything wrong, getting all these people worked up that you need the most updated vaccine. No, you need the best vaccine. You need the vaccine that will give you the longest protection, that is the most easily changed. And the reason we advocate for Novavax is because its platform overcomes these issues. So we have a chart actually, because we do have a saltation event on the horizon we're keeping our eyes on. And it's been talked about since about June, and it has been circulating, and it's BA.3.2. Okay. BA.3.2 is a notable saltation event, but it hasn't gained the JN1 capability. So I don't know if you guys remember when we were getting the XBB 1.5 vaccines approved, we saw BA.2.86 on the horizon. We were looking at that. But BA.2.86 didn't have greater infection capability. So we're waiting for it to gain a certain mutation, which it eventually gained, and that became BA.2.86.1, which we called JN1. And that was a saltation event that required the update of all vaccines. So when you look at the chart, you can see now this chart is called antigenic cartography, and it shows the relative distance of variants to each other and the immune responses created by two mRNA vaccines. So keep in mind, these are not the responses of one mRNA, these are the responses of two. So they're trying to get as close as possible. And so if you notice that the antigenic placement of your immune response is not directly on top of your variant itself. It's a little to the left, a little to the right, a little above, a little kind of goes all over, a little below for BA.5, for example. I'm not sure why there's that deviance, but I think it's just important to look at because we're aiming for this variant, but that's actually how close we get. So even when you're trying to aim for this stuff, you end up 1 or 2 antigenic units apart. JN1 was a good example of a lot of the responses were kind of closer. JN1, KB2, those are all kind of KB3. They're all kind of in the same territory. So that's what's kind of made this work. Now, if you look over to the right, far right, you have BA.3.2. Now, since this is relative to each other, we can take different times throughout history and infer upon how the range worked previously to how the range will work in comparison to this. So if you go down to D614G, it's right next to Delta. In this chart, this is as close to wild type as we get. So just assume D614G is the wild type, okay? It's a little further probably to the left. But the point was that the distance between BA1 and D614G is the same as the distance from BA1 to BA5. This was an idea we talked about a lot during the BA1, BA4-5 vaccine approval, and why they waited to see what would happen before making the decision. Because if BA4-5 were going to take off, they were antigenically too dissimilar from BA1 that mRNA vaccines were not going to be effective. So when you look at the distinction between the two, we can say, okay, so mRNA, its limitation is from D614G to BA1. So it's basically 2.5 antigenic units is the limit of what these vaccines are capable of. So when you get to a JN1 vaccine, for example, in the upper part, you can see the JN1 responses are too far from XFG, or XFG is like really the limit. So JN1 mRNA and Novavax is still going to work against XFG, no problem. But for Novavax was able to reach from D614G all the way over to BA5 with a third shot. So with a third shot, it was able to go that far. Now, it was not able to go from D614G to XBB 1.5. That was too far. That requires an update. So when your distance goes to D614G to BA5, we can just get additional vaccines with the same thing, and you'll work it out no problem. Also, this is just neutralizing antibodies, which is only one small portion of what Novavax does as a vaccine because of the Matrix M and the saponin-based adjuvant. And I always tell people, if you're thinking about any kind of like supplement you want to add to deal with persistence to help boost your immune system and either, defend against stuff that's already there or protect against future infections, looking into saponin-based supplements is like the way to go. I cannot, ginseng is my, poison of choice. Everyone's going to be a little different, but I really cannot stress enough that this boosts this whole process. So when you look at the map though, and you look at from JN1 to BA.3.2, that's about the distance from D614G to BA5. It's very, very similar. It's a little closer actually. JN1 and BA.3.2 are a little closer than D614G and BA5. Keep in mind that D614G is closer than it would be because the wild types that it was originally based off of would be just a little further to the left. I don't know why it's not on the chart, but here we are. So we can see that Novavax, with its JN1, can reach BA.3.2. And they might be like, well, what about with just one booster? Okay, this is why we talk about getting the full series and why it's so important. Because as we've said many times with JN1, most people who are starting out with Novavax either need to get the 3-shot series, which will reach them to BA.3.2 automatically, right? They're 3-shot series, you're at BA.3.2 right off the bat. So you're good to go. Now, the problem being is that whatever is going to come from this next, if it continues to the right to be further away from JN1 so that it is more antigenically distinct, then we're going to need to update. That's the saltation of it. So I think this study makes this point that BA.286 and KP.3.2 are kind of similar in the sense that they're one step away from a saltation event. Now, we've been lucky so far that that hasn't happened, but there's still plenty of time. So when we think about what Novavax can do compared to mRNA, mRNA can only reach from JN1 to XFG. If it's lucky, that's its limit. But Novavax can reach from JN1 to BA.3.2. This is important because if we're trying to keep up with variants and offer the best protection, you're better off just being able to go get a booster that is in the stores ready to go rather than having to wait for an update. And in the midst of waiting for an update, getting an extra booster of this will help you increase the range in the meantime. So these people who are saying, oh, it's comparative to mRNA, are deceiving you and selling you a less effective vaccine.